Hi friends, my name is Anna. Welcome back to my channel. So for today's video, I thought it would be really fun to talk to you guys about the 5 books that have absolutely changed my life. So for every single book that I will talk to you guys about today, they have stayed with me since the day that I read them. All of these books have left their mark on my soul in some way, and I will never forget about them, and I will never forget the reading experience for me, what it was like reading these books for the first time. And I'm just really grateful that these came into my life when they did, and I'm so thankful that I got the chance to read them and now share them with you guys. So some of the books that I'm going to be talking to you guys about, I read in middle school and have stayed with me since then, and some of the other ones are books that I read more recently that I felt so strongly about that they needed to be included in this. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys about these books today and hopefully give you guys some great books to add to your TBR, especially since spring and summertime is coming up and it's going to be great reading weather. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the first book I want to talk to you guys about is a very sentimental book to me, and that is The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. So this is a World War II historical fiction novel that follows the story of a 9-year-old girl who's living in Germany basically at the start of World War II. So this is really more of a coming-of-age story where we're following Liesel, this little girl, as she's growing up in Germany during this very pivotal point where the war is just starting, and in order to protect Liesel from the threat of the Nazis, her parents decide to send her away to go live with a foster family. So this story really follows Liesel and the life that she's living with her foster family and the street that she's growing up on. So what's really interesting is that we are watching Liesel go through these really difficult situations and have to learn about really heavy topics such as grief and loss, war, prejudice, things like that. And you see her encounter these things and have to basically kind of develop and stand to her own moral code. So we're watching her go through these experiences and grow up in the middle of this really horrific war. So Liesel is a very perceptive little girl and very unique, and she recognizes that words have power, especially during this war where she's witnessing this very, very powerful man use his words to do very horrible things. So Liesel recognizes that and begins stealing books as a way to kind of gain some semblance of control in her life in a world where she really has no control. So this story is just so fascinating, but my absolute favorite thing about this book is that it is narrated from the perspective of death. So not only is it really interesting to hear from the perspective of death during one of the most awful, horrific wars to date, but also it's really interesting watching death narrate and almost watch over this little girl as she goes through her life and grows up. The first time I read this book, I was actually in middle school, and I distinctly remember the moment when I realized that this story was narrated by death, and from that moment I was immediately hooked. I knew this book was so special, and since then I've read it 2 more times and it still has a very, very profound effect on me. I really feel like this book does a really great job at handling and discussing really difficult topics, but it does it in a way that's suitable for people really in all ages. And this book specifically really sparked my interest and passion for reading World War II historical fiction novels. So I actually had to order this book from the UK because I way prefer this cover over like the US edition. It's like got dominoes and just looks really old and isn't really my favorite, but this one I love so much, and I just want to show you guys. On the cover it has Death and Liesel, and they're kind of like dancing off together, and it's just so freaking cute. So I also really love the idea of sharing a quote with you guys from each of these books as well, because they are just written so beautifully, and I thought it'd be fun to share them with you guys. So the quote that I chose from The Book Thief is really beautiful, and it says, "The human heart is a line, whereas mine is a circle, and I have the endless ability to be in the right place at the right time. The consequence of this is that I'm always finding humans at their best and worst. I see their ugly and their beauty, and I wonder how the same thing can be both." So cute. This was an absolutely incredible book, and I will never forget about this. All right, so the next book on this list, I actually read for the first time last year. It was at the end of last year, and I loved it so much I decided to annotate it and gift it to my sister. So I actually had to buy myself a new copy of the book, which is what I have here, and that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. So in this book, we are following the story of a woman who lives in France in the 1700s, and her name is Addie LaRue. And she's a really special young woman where in the beginning of the book, we get a sense that Addie really values her freedom and independence, and even beyond that, she almost wants to leave her mark on this world in a really spectacular way. However, because it is the 1700s in France, those options are really not available to her, and she really doesn't have a lot of freedom. So in the beginning of the story, we see a very clear example of this. Addie is actually told that she is about to be forced off into another marriage, and she really tries to get out of this situation but is unsuccessful. On the day of her wedding, she runs away and goes to a field and just starts praying to any god that will listen to her and hear her out and beg them to help her get out of this situation. So unfortunately for Addie, somebody does come to answer her prayers. This stranger that she meets does gift her the freedom that she wants, but it ends up being a curse because now everyone who meets Addie will forget her. So at the beginning of this story, we see Addie make this deal with this person, and this book basically follows the rest of her journey over the course of the next 300 years. So in this book, we are switching back and forth between two timelines, between the 1700s and between modern day 2000s, when we see Addie's story pick up again. So in the present day timeline where we meet Addie again, she actually is introduced to somebody and something very interesting happens. So I obviously can't say too much more without giving the book away, but what happens to her absolutely changes the trajectory of the story and where her life goes. So what kind of drew me to pick this book up first was just the storyline and overall concept. I thought those concepts were really unique and interesting, and it kind of felt like it would be a little bit relatable to me as an introvert, because you're reading about someone who's literally invisible and being forgotten about by people, which sounds bad, but it just felt relatable. So I was really drawn to pick this book up. I was not expecting the amazing writing that this book is just absolutely rich with to just completely consume my life. I was so obsessed with this book when I was reading it. V.E. Schwab's writing style in this book is masterful. It is so beautiful and eloquent and lyrical. She has a very poetic way of describing things that's also very profound and just very gritty and heartfelt sometimes. Now, being fully transparent with you guys, this book is kind of like a cilantro book, so people either hate it or they love it, and I completely understand why if that's the case. So both of the main characters in this book are morally gray, which makes it a very interesting read, but also on top of that, you watch them make decisions that can be a little bit frustrating at times. This is very much a character-driven book, so there's no plot. It can feel slow-paced at times. It can kind of feel a little repetitive at times, but there is intentionality to the repetition. And I think that's because the writing style is so artistic and just lyrical and beautiful. So just to give you guys an example of that, I do have a quote as well from this book. So this quote is referring to Addie and her desire for wanting her own freedom and independence. So this quote says, "If she must grow roots, she would rather be left to flourish wild instead of pruned, would rather stand alone, allowed to grow beneath the open sky. Better than firewood cut down just to burn in someone else's hearth." So honestly, I think that quote is really beautiful and impactful, but this book is just full of really excellent writing and quotes like that. So I definitely think you guys should check this book out if you haven't already. All right, you guys, so I'm really excited to talk to you guys about this next book. It's very sentimental and it just has a very special place in my heart. So this book is actually responsible for getting me back into my reading phase as an adult, and that is Beneath the Scarlet Sky by Sullivan. So this is another World War II historical fiction novel. In this book, we are following the story of a 16-year-old Italian kid, and his name is Pino. He is living with his family in Milan at the start of World War II. So during this time, Italy was actually being bombed by the Allies because Mussolini had partnered with Hitler. In an effort to protect Pino and his younger brother, his parents decided to send them up north to a school that kind of sits along the Swiss border in the Italian mountains. So at this school is where Pino's story really takes off because he ends up meeting a priest. So this priest is working undercover to help Jews escape persecution and cross these mountains to get to neutral zone in Switzerland. So this priest ends up asking Pino for help in leading groups of Jews across these mountains so that he can help lead them to freedom. Now, that is the very, very, very tip of the iceberg of what this book covers. But basically from the age of 16 to around 18 years old, Pino's life and involvement in the war drastically changes, and he does some of the most incredible, unbelievable things that I've ever read someone doing. Now, what makes this story even more incredible is that it is actually based on a true story. So Sullivan heard this story through the grapevine from someone and was so amazed at this story, he decided to fly out to Italy and meet Pino in person and hear his story. So this book is kind of a nonfiction woven into a historical fiction book because while the base of this story is from Pino's real experience, there are elements of this that were woven in to kind of help piece the story together or add a little bit of cohesion. So take it with a grain of salt. I personally consider this a historical fiction novel, but if you were a fan of The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna, please, 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 please read this book. I cannot stress that enough. Honestly, this book is so worth checking out. It is action-packed, it has love and espionage, and Pino's story is just one that I believe needs to be told over and over and over again. One of my favorite quotes from this book is, "Life is change, constant change, and unless we are lucky enough to find the comedy in it, change is nearly always a drama, if not a tragedy. But after everything, and even when the skies turn scarlet and threatening, I still believe that if we are lucky enough to be alive, then we must give thanks for the miracle of every moment of every day, no matter how flawed." Such a beautiful book. So I read this book for the first time back in 2019, and I remember this is actually one of the very first books that I stayed up until like 4 in the morning just to finish it because it was so beautiful and the ending just totally wrecked me. I was crying. It was just so gut-wrenching, and I went to work the next day and told like everyone in my office about how incredible this book was. This book is definitely worth the read. So as you guys may or may not know, I do mostly read fantasy and sci-fi novels, but I do read romance books, and for me, I feel like those are kind of more of like my palate cleanser books. So when I picked up this book at the beginning of the year, I was really, really shocked at how much I loved it. And that book is Happy Place by Emily Henry. So this is a second chance romance book where we're following a couple named Harriet and Wynne. So Harriet and Wynne are a part of this larger friend group, and every summer this friend group gets together and it goes to a lake house where they spend like a week there and just have so much fun and get together and just get away from life. Harriet and Wynne have actually been a couple for the last couple years, and in the beginning of the book we find out that they are now separated and have been broken up for a couple of months. Now this is a problem because we find out that the parents of the girl who owns the lake house, they're actually going to be selling that lake house. So this is now the last year that this group of friends will be able to get together. So this is very interesting for Harriet and Wynne because they don't want to ruin this trip by telling their friends that they're broken up and that they haven't been together over the last couple months. They decide to pretend like they're still together for this week in order to not break their friends' hearts. And after the week is over, they will go their separate ways and be done. So for me, what made this book so incredibly special was how relatable it was. This group of friends is in their like mid to late 20s, And they've kind of reached that place in life where everyone's busy and you kind of naturally start drifting apart over time. So we really start to see Harriet really kind of struggle with the concept that she's kind of losing that really close bond that she once had with her friends. I feel like that topic is handled beautifully in this book. And I also am just a really big sucker for a second chance romance tropes. These kind of like true love stories just bring me a lot of hope and joy, and just made me feel very at peace, very relaxed. This book kind of has become my happy place, and this was actually the very first 5-star book that I read this year. So one of my favorite quotes from this book is actually about Harriet explaining her friendships. It says, "My best friends taught me a new kind of quiet, the peaceful stillness of knowing one another so well you don't need to fill the space. And they taught me a new kind of loud, noise as a celebration, as the overflow of joy at being alive, here and now." This is a really great book to read during this time of year or in summer, so I definitely recommend you pick this book up because I loved it. All right, you guys, so we have finally made it to the last book that I want to talk to you guys about, but it is actually a series, and that is the Rising Trilogy by Pierce Brown. So this is a dystopian sci-fi series in this series, humans have now left Earth and have colonized the rest of the solar system. And this new kind of human organization is called the Society. So the Society is actually split up into a caste system that is built on colors. So members of the Society who are at the very, very bottom are in the red colors, and members who are at the very top of society are in the gold color. And you pretty much have like every variety of color in between there, but we're really focusing on red and gold in this first book. So this first book actually takes place on Mars, where we meet our main character named Darrow. Darrow is actually a member of the red color system. So Darrow and other members of the Red Society are responsible for mining this certain element called helium-3, which is needed to terraform the surface of Mars so everyone else can go and live there. So Darrow has lived his whole life underground. He's never seen the sky, he's never seen the stars, and one day something very, very tragic happens to him. And this tragedy ends up propelling him into a group of rebels. So they decide to turn Darrow physically into a member of Gold Society so that he can go in and infiltrate and basically take them down from the inside. So this first book is really following Darrow's journey as he goes from becoming a member of Red Society to Gold. I've heard people describe this first book as kind of like Hunger Games meets space. I feel like there are Hunger Game elements in this book, but it is not a Hunger Games focused book. This has a very different and clear set of motives, and it becomes very clear what that is as you're reading. This book was really incredible, and it was really amazing getting to see Darrow grow and become the person that he needed to be. But the second book was a freaking masterpiece. At the beginning of this book, you really start on a fast pace, and it really doesn't let up until the end of the book. I would say this series compares more to Game of Thrones than anything. The ending of this book in particular, I have not felt this way about any piece of entertainment since I watched the Red Wedding episode in Game of Thrones. Now that sounds absolutely terrifying, and it was very intense, but it was so phenomenal. My jaw was on the floor. Oh my gosh, it was crazy. There are truly not enough words in the English language that I can use to express how much this series means to me. So this is hands down my favorite series of all time. I'm actually annotating another copy of Red Rising right now for my brother. So let me show you guys what I'm kind of working on right now. All right, so here's the kind of annotation guide that I have so far. I put a quote at the top, I underline and then tab any special quotes I want to highlight. And then I do like to have some little bits of like art in there as well. So this quote says, "I look at him for a moment. Words are a weapon stronger than he knows, and songs are even greater. The words wake the mind, the melody wakes the heart. I come from a people of song and dance. I don't need him to tell me the power of words, but I smile nonetheless." So that's one good quote, but I'll show you guys the opening line. Very first line of the book. I would have lived in peace, but my enemies brought me war. I saw that and I was sold. Like that just hits. Something about his writing is just so like deep and gritty, and I am just a sucker for it. I absolutely love. The series had me laughing, it had me crying. I was angry, I was happy, I was sad. I mean, I went through every emotion reading this book. It was actually a very special experience reading this series because I read it in tandem with my husband. We actually read this series together. We would do tandem reads with the physical book as well as listening to an audiobook, and that was just such a great experience. So if you guys decide that this is something you want to check out, the audiobooks that my husband and I listen to are actually free and they're available here on YouTube. So there's a channel called The Bloody Bookmarker, and he's basically reading the chapters out loud. Honestly, I cannot see these characters with any other voice other than his. I'll link his channel in the description below, and then I'll also put his information on the screen for you guys. But I highly recommend checking this book out. It is phenomenal. All right, you guys, that was it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, especially for those of you who were able to stick it out to the end here with me. I really appreciate you guys watching and listen to me talk about books that have just absolutely changed my life. I hope if anything, you guys were able to take away some books to add to your TBR. So let me know in the comments down below if you guys have read any of these books, or let me know what were the books that you read that changed your life. I would love to know and maybe add some good ones to my TBR as well. So don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and hit subscribe if you guys want to follow along my reading journey. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.